So I have had the pleasure to get to know both of you for about a year. And you have been dedicated attendees at our meetings. You have contributed. You have met with me. You've made so many interviews. And here, once again, I'm calling upon you to be interviewed. And I am so grateful. I am also grateful. I think one of the things that happens in life is that there are these people called wives, and they're never named. And so when I uploaded the last presentation, I made sure to call Helen Mai by name and Elaine Zeilberger by name, because you are part of the story. You are part of the success of what it means to survive such a history. So although this is primarily an interview with Fred and Herbert, your presence is felt and appreciated. And if you feel the urge to say something, feel free. This is not, in a sense, a professional and formal interview. This is really a conversation. I've had years of experience interviewing people, but actually this kind of an interview is unusual and unique. And what is particularly unique is the story that the two of you carry. It's rather incredible. And so that is kind of the focus of today. But of course, anything you want to say is welcome. And I do have to ask Fred, who the last time I saw you, you had a Band-Aid on your ear, and now you have a Band-Aid on the side of your
nose. The skin doctor has to make a living.
That's funny.
Every time they find something else.
Would you stop putting it in front of your mouth?
Yeah, last year I had something there. You know, what can I say? But we are alive and we're here today, and we'll see what comes of this. One of the things, why don't we begin, just because every interview is fresh and new, why don't we begin with each of you introducing yourselves any way you want to do that? How does that sound?
Let Herbie go first. He's the older one.
Herbie, you're the older.
He's got to rub it in.
Okay.
Herbert, yes.
Well, anyway, I'm Herbert Mai. I'm born in Germany in a town called Würzburg, where myself and my father and my mother were taken away from Würzburg and transported to Riga, Latvia, where we were housed in barracks only made for animals. And we were not treated as human beings rather than animals. And if you didn't want to take the interview, they used to kill you, finish case closed, and you were gone. So anyway, now it's about 70 years later, and our memory is not as good anymore as it used to be. As a matter of fact, our memory is practically nil. And everything that happened there is just but a dream. And it's very hard to remember the small things which were terrible and which, like I said, is very hard for me to remember.
Although having had some experience talking with both of you, I am very impressed about what you do remember and the preciousness of those insights and memories. In some ways, they've been distilled and simplified with age. And what's most important bubbles up, and that's what you're able to share with us. Fred, how about you? How would you like to introduce yourself?
My name is Fred Zeilberger. I was born also in the town of Würzburg in December 16, 1929. Herbie was born August 29. I was born December 16, so I was a few months older than me. We lived a pretty normal life till Kristallnacht came along. our father were arrested and deported to a concentration camp. And after 9 weeks, when he was liberated, he came back home, but we couldn't live no more where we used to live. We had to live in the Jewish section of town near the old synagogue, which was burned down. And we were the first transport of 200 of Jews from Würzburg and a few surrounding areas were taken by train on November 27, 1941, and were taken to Nuremberg, and there they filled up the train with other of our people, also from surrounding area, and we were taken to Latvia, Riga, and we were the first transport who came to Jungfernhof.
So thank you both. It's hard to know where to begin. Let's backtrack a little bit. Did you know each other in Würzburg? Did you ever play together on the streets? Yes, no, why? What was it like when you first saw each other? Did you say, wait a minute, were you in the same school? Did you have any encounter before Jungfernhof?
We were both lived in the Sterngasse, that's the street. I lived number 6 and he lived number 12. So we knew each other. We're the same age when we 2-3 years old. We started school together. Our parents, they knew each other, but I don't think we were too friendly. And like you asked, did we play on the street together? We did not play together too much neither, because our family was religious. Herbert was not that religious, and he played with Gentiles, and I played. But we were pretty close together because we always were together, and we were taken away in November of 41, the same transport.
Do you have anything to add to that, Herbert?
Well, like Fred just said, we knew each other practically from that time our birth, which was in 1929, even though we lived only 4 houses apart. I lived at number 12 and he lived number 22, I think. 26. And we went to the same schools because we were not going to schools with Gentiles. We only went to schools with Jewish children, which was a Jewish school. So we knew each other, but nevertheless, Fred came from a more religious Jewish home, and I did not. So we didn't play that much together, but we knew each other from school.
So it's interesting now, as we are adults, thinking about what it means to be 3 years old, 5 years old, 6 years old. In some ways, kids don't create these categories. They just play with who's ever next to them. And yet, these categories and distinctions exist for adults. Who you're permitted to play with, not permitted to play with. Nonetheless, can you describe in words when you first felt this special bond together, that you were on the same destiny? Or did you ever feel it?
Well, I think we felt that way because we were Jewish, and that being a Jew was not a normal thing, because only Gentiles were considered normal things. Jews were outcasts and minority of the people, and they were not allowed to live like everyday German person lived and bought groceries and did business. We were discouraged from going with the other people. And the German young people were discouraged to play with us also.
Anything you want to add, Fred?
Well, after 1938, we all had to wear a Jewish star on your outer garment. And whenever you walked on the street, everybody knew you were Jewish descent, and they cursed you out, and they called you names. And some tried to beat you up when you walked across the street, but we survived that part of it.
In retrospect, that was the easiest. But what did it feel like to be called names by your peers?
Well, you felt that you did not belong to the average person on the street. And they used to call us names, and they used to have stories to say. The one thing I remember is called Jude, Jude, Eck, 10 Uhr musst verreckt, 11 Uhr musst begraben sein, 12 Uhr musst beim Teufel sein. And all these kind of things. And if they used to see us on the street, like Fred said, we were known as Jews because we all wore the yellow Star of David, which was considered derogative. We did not belong to the average human being or belong to the society. We were outcast and did not belong to the average person. And we were looked down upon and like minority or vermin, which they used to call us.
So this notion of belonging to family, belonging to schools, belonging to community, belonging to a nation, belonging to a state, that was gradually stripped away. Certainly, once the Nuremberg laws were put into place, it was illegal for Jews to be citizens of the state. Instead, they were subjects of the state. And that just increased. What kind of memories do you have of when you were told that you were going to be leaving Nuremberg, and that all of a sudden you or your parents were packing bags, and you were imagining what you were leaving behind?
Well, I think we were too young to really understand what was going on and could not see the future of what was going on or will be going on. We only knew that we were outcast from society and disregarded as human beings, and we could not play with other kind of people, and we were decorated with a Star of David on our outer garment. So whenever we used to walk on the street, anybody that didn't like or didn't even know what they were doing, hated Jews, and used to let us know who we were and derogative us, and told us that we're not the same and we don't want you and get out of here.
Anything, Fred, you want to add?
Well, first of all, we were notified in Würzburg that we had to report in a couple of days to a certain square, and during the night we were marched to the train station, to not the regular train station, to the freight train station, and we were taken away, and they told you to take a suitcase or a little belongings along. From there we were taken to Nuremberg.
And
And I must say one thing. I think that us two boys, Fred and me, we were 12 years old, and at that time of our lives, we didn't realize what we are and who we are and what was going on. We didn't understand that like you young people today. They have more newspapers, they have more television, they understand completely things different than we did at that time. We did not understand what was going on, and our parents did not tell us because they wanted to not harm us with this kind of news, so we didn't know what it was all about.
Did you find each other? Did you turn to people your age and say, what do you think's going on here? Where are we going? Why are they doing this to us? Did you ask those questions?
No, not really. Because
Personally, I don't think we did.
nobody ever knew where we were going or where we were taken.
So you spent hours going from one city to another collection point to another city. Do you remember how your bags were infiltrated? How the processing experience of having your personal belongings searched?
But they searched it in Nuremberg. They went to and whatever they didn't like or whatever they liked, they took away from you. And then they gave it back to the suitcase.
Oh, they did give it back.
Yeah, well, you took it along. And like in Jungfernhof, there were thousands of suitcases from all the transport where came. They had to leave them on a certain spot.
Did you feel as you were leaving Nuremberg and Würzburg, did you feel a sense of losing home? Were you aware? Did you think you would return? What was that feeling like? You know, leaving a book or a toy at home.
It was a terrible feeling because I remember we had a pretty large house, 10-family house. So mostly the people there were Gentiles, but we looked like one family. And one day when they told us we cannot live in our house anymore, and I felt like I was thrown out or something. And all of a sudden I was not allowed to go to my house anymore. And it was a terrible, terrible feeling because as a child, I played in that house, including Fred, and it was like home to us. And that was taken away from us. And we didn't own the homes anymore. That took them away from us. And we couldn't play there anymore. And everything was negative of any kind. Food, sleeping places, living places, and so on. It was a terrible, terrible time, even though we did not understand the whole conception of Jewishness, even though my parents must have understood it more than I did, because I did not understand it. I thought the moral would be different than it is today. Like I said, we were 12 years old and our minds were not as well educated as children are today. Today they're more read, they're more seen things on television, newspapers, magazines. We didn't have none of those things. And our parents, they try to show us of being part in a, like we say today, in the Holocaust. But they didn't even know what the word Holocaust was, or what it is, or what it comes from, or what is going to be with us tomorrow or the next day. I only remember that we were spiced up, we were looked down upon, and we were called vermin and non-living people like all the rest of them. We felt we were not welcome in a society that we used to belong to.
So there's the contrast between then and now is very striking in terms of what questions we're allowed to ask now, what questions we didn't even dream up what we could to ask. Schools were much more authoritarian, and the kind of conflict that parents must have felt in terms of both protecting you and also today, part of the protection is to inform children about racism and bias and all of the other things that are operating. But then there was a cloud of silence. Do you remember what it was like to one of the issues in this history, strange issue, is that there are plenty of pictures of the collection and, you know, the baggage searching prior to boarding the trains. There are no pictures and no records of what happened on the trains, what happened at Schieratava train station, and what happened at Jungfernhof. And the pictures resume after Jungfernhof, when people were sent to the ghetto, to Salaspils, to Kaiserwald. So there is a gap of information. And the only information we have comes from your testimonies. So I wonder if we should start with your memories of what it was like to board the train, who you sat with, what kind of luggage you had, whether you had things to drink, were Nazis on board of the trains, how were you treated?
Well, like I said once before, we both were 12 years old with very little memory or knowledge of what was going on today or yesterday or tomorrow. We just did what our parents told us to do, and that was the right thing, whether it was good or bad. We did not know whether it was good or bad. We just did what our parents told us to do.
Anything you want to add, Fred? I mean, was there any inside voice that said, what's going on here?
Nobody asked any questions, as far as I'm concerned. But coming back for the question he asked before, my parents had some Gentile friends, and my father had some Gentile workers in the tailor shop. Before we left, we gave them some merchandise to keep in case we come back. And when I came back and Herbie came back, and we went once to visit these people, and a tablecloth what belonged to us was laying on their table. That's how they kept it.
Mm-hmm.
That was not only the case, I remember very well. I did not have a winter coat, so my mother went to a tailor, which was Fred's parents, and asked them if they have a coat for my son. And I said, yes, we have one. And they gave Fred's coat to me. They sold them to me. And I had a coat which belonged to the Zeilbergers.
Mm-hmm.
And when we came back, all us Jewish people gave some of their belongings to Gentile people for keeping in case, not in case, when we come back, they'll give it back to us. They took practically many items which they took and never gave us back. And like Fred said before, we came once to their house and there was a Tischdecke tablecloth laying there which belonged to Fred's parents. And they said, we don't have anything which belongs to you.
Yeah, recently someone asked me about the meaning of justice. It's a difficult question to ask, you know, when we hear these stories and we understand not just the murder, but the theft and the, you know, the disregard.
And let me interrupt you just 1 minute. Like Herbie said, they had an apartment house where there's a lot of Gentile. And next to his house, there's a fellow who used to be very friendly with, even after the war. The nicest fellow you could think of. And whenever we came there or we left, he was crying like a baby. And he was very good to us, and he was very good to Herbie. And not everybody is bad. And a few years ago, we were invited to Germany also for a week, and we made a documentary. And we walked through the street, and a woman came out, and she says, I was your Shabbos-Goy. You know what that means?
But you can explain it.
They turn on the light for you on Saturday and this, and your mother always gave me matzah. I mean, there's some, and also then she said, and we went to Herbie's store and he always gave me a slice of bologna in the farm. Things like that. I mean, there's some good ones there. We're still in touch with a few, even the one who invited us. And when they made a documentary, they made it for the train museum from Nuremberg and Munich. And we were shown in that museum on a screen in our story. And that's also a Dr. Ryan, and she sent Yontif cards or Christmas cards, and we're still in touch with them.
So it is important to also hold those memories dear. And that question, you know, these categories, perpetrator, victim, bystander, upstander, rescuer, you know, what do they mean? And what do they mean in terms of memory and justice? They matter because there's not a lot of support to stand up for truth. And that's in part what this project is about. It's really trying to recapture as best we can all of the stories, good and bad. So that's really important to share, and a symbol of hope that we can consider in the midst of appreciating the difficulties. Do you remember the walk from the trains to the camp? How long it was? Was it daytime, nighttime? Was it snowing? Was anyone hurt, killed, died?
As far as I'm concerned, it was morning, and it was snowing, was bitter cold, and we were taken walking, I mean, marching. Whoever couldn't walk, they left already behind, and we might never see them again. And I would say it was about a kilometer, or maybe close to a mile, to walk to the camp.
And you stayed with your family?
Family stayed together.
Anything, Herb, you want to add to that?
Well, I remember stopping in Skirikova, which was a Latvian city, for the Nuremberger transport, which we stopped. And they told us we're going to go to another camp. And we walked. And anybody that couldn't walk, they shot and killed right on the spot. And once you see that as a child, somebody being killed is a terrible, terrible feeling. And you cannot understand what this is all about. And all of a sudden you are even more scared of the whole thing than anything else. And if you was told go left, you went left. If they told you to go right, you went right, because you were scared of your life, because they made sure that you were scared, and you listened to them by killing a few people, or I don't know how many. When I say a few, it could have been many, but I know it was winter time, and it was very, very cold, and there was snow on the ground 2 or 3 feet high. And like I said, if any person couldn't walk anymore, which there were old people, they just used to shoot them right there on the spot. And by seeing something like that, you were frightened, like to no extent how frightened you were. You didn't even understand that something like that was permissible. But it was, and we was just scared of anything, to do anything other than what we were told.
Were there moments, I think you've described that feeling, and it's, you know, I think there are people in the world that might feel that today, but it is definitely not your average feeling. You know, we try to live in safety. Do you remember ways that your mother or father comforted you in the midst of all of this confusion? They must have also been at loss for words. You know, everyone must have been shocked. But how did they perform as parents, in terms of helping you have the courage to move forward? Or were you the leaders? Sometimes that happens in families, that you become the parents and you become the decision makers. Any memories of that?
Well, I seem to remember there was an order given, if you cannot walk or you're too weak to walk, there are buses which will take you to the next destination. And quite a few people went on these buses. My mother says, let's go on the bus too. And I remember I myself, as a little boy, said to my mother, no, we're not going to go. We're going to walk with the rest of them. And then in the end, when we got to that camp where we walked, the people that went on the buses were all liquidated. So I said to my mother, you see, we did the right thing. But like I said, we were young boys of 12 years old, and we didn't know things like a 12-year-old boy knows today. They're more smarter, they're more educated. It's different time of our life. We were just scared of anything, and we listened to whatever command was given, whether it was by the Germans, our father or our mother. We did what we were told without any questions.
Anything, Fred, you want to add to that?
Not really.
So, in terms of your memories of sleeping, I mean, you know, there's a question, what was a day like at Jungfernhof? Was there a roll call? Where did you sleep? Were you sleeping with your parents? Were you sleeping with other kids? Were you sleeping near animals? How did you go from one day to the next?
We slept in a barrack. It used to be a barn, and there were 3-4 bunk beds on top of each other. And you just lay down at night. But as far as I'm concerned, I think I slept with my father. And the women were separate and the men were separate.
Mm-hmm. So did that mean that your contact with your mother ended? Did you have other ways of seeing her during the day?
I seen her nearly every day, yes. Like
Mhm.
I told you before, my father was a tailor, and he made the uniform. He tailored the uniforms for the SS and for SEC. And I think for that, my father had a little privileges. So we stood together because we all 4 survived.
Mm-hmm. And Herbert, did you feel that sense of protection, or were you just, it was just you, your mother, and your father?
Well, like I said before, I don't remember anything in that circumstance anymore. What happened, like I said, we did what we were told to do, whether it was our parents who told us what to do. When as S-man, we just did and obeyed what they told us to do.
When you saw each other, how did you see each other? Did you see each other in the barracks, on the farm, on the land, on the farm? When you made eye contact, what was that eye contact like? What were you trying to communicate with each other, or what were you thinking inside?
Well, we hope that every day it's going to get better because you only live from day to day. So whenever you see each other, you said hello, and nobody expected what's going to happen. And like you said, I was not even 12 years old. Just you didn't realize what was going on.
There's the picture of me.
Mhm.
Esther, how do you get the picture bigger? Just push on it?
I don't know. You can move the screen a little bit, but we see Herbert.
Oh, okay, because he's not sitting very high.
It's fine. We see him. So one of the things that you both talk about, and that is really interesting, is when the camp became this agricultural farm, which was really toward the end. Do you remember people just disappearing throughout the camp?
People disappeared every day. There were less than, I mean, in the beginning when the transport came, the majority of people disappeared right away. They were even shot into the woods, or they were put in a truck and were gassed with the exhaust from the truck, and we stuck them up because the ground was so bitter cold and was frozen. So we stuck the Jewish people up like firewood on top of each other. And in the springtime, the German army came in and they dynamited some holes and then they buried the bodies.
And neither of you remember anyone saying Kaddish over the bodies. So I'm always wondering whether the word bury was even appropriate, or whether the word dumping bodies into a hole is more descriptive. I don't know.
Stomping is more than nobody said Kaddish, as far as I'm concerned.
Mhm. Did it feel like when the camp turned into a farm that was somehow a different era, that something changed?
But we knew it was going towards the end because you could hear already some of the cannons from the Russian army coming closer and closer. So they tried to cover up that there was a camp or there were graves. So we planted potatoes and they put in some, like I said before, some animals, some sheep and some cows, and they made it look like a farm. But there were not that many people there in Jungfrauhof anymore.
So they had already relocated people at the ghetto and Salaspils and Kaiserwald.
Eisenwald, I think, was after
Mm.
the ghetto was liquidated. I don't think before that they brought people to Kaiserwald. No,
And you had the most unusual story of not only coming from the same neighborhood, being on the same transport, ending up at the same camp, and then surviving the aftermath of that story and returning to Würzburg and then coming to the US. How much of that happened with you together?
everything happened together. Once we were liberated, we made our journey back to Würzburg. We want to see if anybody of our immediate family came back. And in Würzburg, there was a Jewish old age home and a Jewish hospital. And that was not destroyed because in Würzburg, 90% of the town was completely bombed. And the few Jews who came back, they put us up in that nursing home. And Herbie and I lived together in the same room until we came to the United States. We were both on the same ship coming in 1947. And I was taken to Ellis Island, where he was taken to his aunt and uncle first. Or I even in the night after I came out of the Ellis Island, I was taken to the orphanage because we came here as war orphan. And President Truman signed that time papers that we didn't need no affidavit. And we were taken to the Bronx in a Caldwell Avenue. And that was run by a Jewish organization, and they took very well medical care and everything together. And then we were drafted in the army here in 1951, the same time. Friends ever since. And we lived here, he lived in Kew Gardens, and I live in Cedarhurst, but now he lives in Florida.
How do you describe a friendship that has existed for so many years, where you together witness things that most people in life never see?
There is a bondage between Fred and me, which cannot be broken because we're going back to our childhood, our infanthood, and we always were together. We didn't know any different, and these were friends which we were bounded for life. And like he said, we came out of the camps together. We went to the United States together. We went in the army together. We were discharged from the army. He lived 171st Street. I lived 172nd Street of Manhattan. And we all knew ourselves. And then we both got married, and we're still friends today. And if we ask one or the other, who's your best and longest friend, we only would wish it was Fred or it was Herbert. And that bondage cannot be broken no matter what happens.
Fred, anything you want to add?
Well, our wives also are very close together. We also lived in Florida as snowbirds for 30 years, and not too far from the Hurricane Halifax. Wives are very friendly. We are married 66 years, over 66, and a short time later, and the wives speak at least 2-3 times a week. And we get along very well.
It's a friendship that cannot be broken in my eyes. No matter what happens, we'll always be friends and stay friends for the rest of our lives. And years don't mean anything because we always knew each other, and even our aunts and uncles knew each other. It was like one family that knew each other.
So sometimes, whether it's families or friends, what happens in these kinds of unusual, and I might add, this is one of the most unusual friendships I've ever heard of, is that you bear witness to each other's lives, that you know that the kind of experiences you had that are hard to imagine, even with the best descriptions that you provide, that each of you knows what the other person is describing. And it's a kind of sacred trust. Anything else that we should discuss in this interview? So this interview is unusual because it really is about this unusual friendship.
I look at it like there's two people, Fred and myself, that we know each other our whole life, and we went through all of our life, and we're still together and still friends, and our wives are still friends, and our families know each other for seems to be forever. And it's just a bondage which cannot be broken. And we went through thick and we went through hell, and our parents got killed without us knowing. And it was just the two of us. And we today, after about 90 years, we still have the same friendship or know each other like we never knew anybody else.
Anything you want to add, Fred?
Really, I just want to ask, you're talking about memorial in Jungfernhof. I put up memorial in Cedar Park Cemetery in New Jersey for my parents. And I also put up a memorial on the wall. Did you ever go to the Holocaust Museum in Miami? Did you ever go there?
I've never been there.
There's a wall with all the names and my
Yeah.
parents on
Mhm.
there too.
His parents.
Kurdish parents there too, and I also have a memorial in Israel with Yad Hashem and with the Jewish National Fund.
So the ultimate goal of this project is to build a memorial at Jungfernhof. It's long overdue. Let's face it, it's 80 years. You know, what's taking so long? You know, who hasn't stepped up to do this work? I don't know when it's going to happen. I hope it happens in all of our lifetimes. We deserve to see it happen. The one thing that's quite interesting in doing this work is that even though the goal is to make a memorial, the memorial is the end point. And actually, it's all the work that we do first before we get to the memorial that has so much content and meaning. So it's preserving this interview that I think will move people. It's all about how can we be better human beings in the world. So certainly a memorial is the goal, but also really documenting these conversations, these precious relationships. Your story is unique.
I don't think that this story is unique because I think if you talk about Dachau or Stutthof or Jungfernhof, it is all the same. That's where the Jews were killed or liquidated. And it doesn't mean any difference whether it's 70 years or 80 years or 90 years ago. It does not matter. And when you hear the names of Buchenwald or Dachau or Auschwitz, we all are affected because we all belong to the same family.
So that is, you know, this, in some ways, this interview acknowledges that. That's an important fact that you describe. And it also acknowledges the meaning of relationship in terms of how we figure out how to survive. And somehow this relationship between the two of you is remarkable and inspirational. And it's, yes, it is in the foreground of death in the background, but it brings our attention to what it means to be 12 years old. And we all can remember how difficult being 12 years old is. But the kind of comfort that comes from a peer who is going through the same experiences, even if you don't talk about it, that knowledge and that experience becomes internalized. So I thank you for sharing that with us.
But thank you too.
And I thank Helen and Elaine, who are there but not seen, because you're a part of the story. And I wish all four of you well. We're going to stop the interview now.